Okay, yesterday we started Tochen, so there was we went all over the place. By the way, one thing I just want to make, yesterday I said it, but on salt, there also is a din of grinding, because salt also comes in the ground. So just like you can't have a pepper, what do you call that stuff? Pepper grinder, so you can't have a salt grinder. And also this that we were discussing yesterday, that the din is, we'll just swear up to now. But you can't, there's no such thing as grinding after grinding. Which means that if you had, let's say, a piece of challah which is baked, so that it was already ground into flour. Now if you take the challah or the cracker and you crumble it up, there's no problem, because halachically you can't grind after grinding. But what happens though, if you cut a vegetable or a fruit into very small pieces, okay, which is forbidden because we said it's grinding, but what happens if you take it and cut it even smaller? So that's still called grinding. Halachically it would be forbidden, because the question is, if it's already ground up into a powder, then you can't grind it more. Even if it was made later into a cookie, but if it's not ground up into a powder, basically, it's still a piece, and you can cut it smaller, so then it's still considered grinding. Okay, so we're learning like this. Grinding, you're not allowed to grind anything with an instrument that you normally grind with. So therefore, things that don't grow from the ground, or don't come from the ground, like we said, eggs, tuna fish, what other things don't grow from the ground? All those is meat, poultry, chicken, eggs, all those things don't go from the ground, but you still can't grind it with a machine like a rib eisen, like a grater. You can't use a grater on it because it's wheat. Somebody asked yesterday, we learned that you can grind eggs because eggs are not coming from the ground. But can you use an egg slicer? So I saw the poskim right, you can use an egg slicer because it's made to slice, it's not made to grind. So therefore it's not even though eggs you can grind technically, but you can't use a vessel that you normally is used for grinding. You can't use a grater or something like that. But, what? That you can't use. That it says, yeah, but to chop it into small pieces, if it's a very small piece, then it would be forbidden.
What is that different from sliding in small pieces?
Sliding? Slicing. Because a knife is made for a lot of things. A knife is made for cutting. This chopper is made to grind into small pieces. So if it's, again, you can use an egg slicer on a piece of cucumber or something like that, because then you're actually making into small pieces. So that would be, the whole question was called the rib eisen. Rib eisen, those things that you chop. So that, some people say you could, some people say you can't, and things like that. So that's basically where we're up to in grinding. Okay, we learned also about mashing. Mashing, if you want to mash on Shabbos, you have to use, you can't even use a fork. You could use a fork, but the handle of a fork. You can't use the teeth of the fork, because mashing it is a form of grinding, because you're mashing it into little pieces. But if you do it with the handle of a fork, because right before eating, because it's not the normal way of doing it, so the Chachamim allowed it. But we discussed, there's a whole question we were discussing yesterday about, for instance, mashing a banana and avocado. So many opinions hold that that's not called grinding. If you mash a potato, so there's pieces, separate pieces, which is the definition of grinding, taking something and making into little pieces. When you mash a banana or an avocado, so everybody says you can use the handle of a fork or a knife or a spoon, because it's not the normal way of doing it. But there are many opinions in halacha, and that's the way we hold, by the way, that a banana and avocado is not called grinding even when you mash it. Because when you mash it, it remains a solid mass. It's not becoming into little pieces like a potato or other things that you would mash. So that would be allowed. It's an interesting question. Years ago, today people would say gross, but years ago they didn't have blenders and didn't have grinders. Okay? So how did a baby couldn't eat a piece of meat, right? You'd have to grind it up. They give it to the baby. So how did they do it in the olden days? The Gemara says the mothers would chew it. The mother would chew it, and then after it became ground up, but the mother, she gave it to the baby to eat. They didn't have grinders and didn't have all those things. So the most practical thing was, why did they say the mother? Because the father probably couldn't be interested. Wasn't interested in doing it. But the mother would chew it up. So the poskim write, if the mother wants to do that to feed the baby, it has to be right before feeding the baby. She can't do it like Shabbos morning for Shabbos afternoon or Friday night for Shabbos morning because it's not immediate use. And it's grinding. Grinding in your mouth. So if you swallow it, that's called eating. But if you grind it in your teeth and you're spitting it out for the baby to eat, gross, huh? Gross, you wouldn't eat that. Yeah, so then that would be called grinding, and it's only permitted right for immediate use. Now we also learned, there's a very big argument in halacha. If you remember by Beirut, we learned you can pick good from bad right before eating. You can't do it for later. So the question is, can you mash and grind, not with a grinder, but with a fork, let's say. Am I allowed to grind food right before eating for immediate use? Right before eating. Is it like Beirut that's called the way of eating? So you grind up right before eating. So there are many opinions that say you're allowed to. Right before eating, you can grind, not with the grinder, not with the grater, but with the fork or whatever it is. Many opinions say you would be allowed to do it right before eating. There's a second opinion. The Bais Yosef that's what Ramah is making. The Bais Yosef is strict. And the Bais Yosef said, no, it's different than Bora. Bora is, that's the way you have to eat it. This is just grinding. It's not the way you have to eat it. And most poskim, the Alter Rebbe also says, even though halachically you could, but it's better to be strict, not to rely on the leniency of doing it right before eating. So therefore, if you want to mash something, you should do it with the handle of the spoon or, things like that you should do it in that different way. Okay, we said grinding up right before eating, if in not the normal way of doing it, mashing, or they say, what happens if you need to cut up a vegetable for a baby right before eating? So again, many opinions say you could do it, because it's right before eating. Many opinions say you shouldn't do it right away. You shouldn't do it. You should do it before Shabbos or whatever. Okay, now what are grinding implements? Just to mention a few. A grinder, a garlic press. Because the garlic press actually grinds when you put the garlic in and you squeeze it. So you actually grind up the garlic. Potato masher, mortar and pestle, those are things like this. Egg slicers, cheese slicers is not called grinder. In other words, what happens if you have, let's say, a knife, they cut cold cuts with. So if it's manual, electric obviously you can't use on Shabbos. But if it's a manual blade, for eggs and things like that, it's a thing made to cut. It's a slicer, that's what it is. So it's not made to grate it. It's not a grater. It's made to slice. So then, let's say you have cold cuts, to give you an example, and you have a roll of cold cut, and you have this machine on Shabbos, and you want to cut it right before eating, or not for right before eating. So you would be allowed to, because again, it's not a grinder, it's not vegetables, it's meat that you're allowed to grind. So just like you can slice it with a knife, you can slice it with that slicer also, because all it is really a knife. What? Yeah, but that's two problems. First of all, that's squeezing. But even that, if you're making the lemon into it's like a garlic press, that you're still making into little pieces. If far squeezing, if you're doing over the food, you could do it. But even then, you shouldn't squeeze with utensils that are designated for squeezing. If you use that utensil for it, with your hand, that's fine. Directly on top of food. Again, it's immediate use. And first of all, according to most opinions, it's allowed anyway. But even then, you're not grinding it. Even when you're not grinding the lemon, you're basically squeezing the lemon. And what's left, you're not grinding it. It's not... What? No, he said with your hand. Yeah, with the vessel you can't do it. But with your hand, you could squeeze. Okay, baked products we said are not... okay. Now there's another interesting din over here. And this is a rabbinic decree that a lot of people, for whatever reason, are not aware of. And that is like this. We learned when the Torah says you're not allowed to do something, so the rabbis made decrees that you shouldn't safeguards. Like they say, you don't, the guys are working in and they're making a hole in the ground, they don't let you walk all the way up to the hole and say don't fall in. They make a fence around it that you shouldn't come, or a cliff. You don't say to the people go all the way to the cliff. They make a fence, and they shouldn't come. So the Chum made fences around the Torah that they're biblically obligated to do. So years ago, how did people make medicine on Shabbos? Or made medicine? Everybody made their own medicine. They were pharmacists. But a lot of people, what did they do? They take herbs. Today everything's synthetic. Okay, but in those years, they would take herbs, grind them up, and make it into medication. So the Chum said, we're not talking about life-endangering situations. That's a given, that's a mitzvah to do on Shabbos. But the Chachamim made a decree because of that you're not supposed to take medication on Shabbos. Now there's a lot of exceptions to the rule. Number one, if somebody is taking blood pressure medication, heart medication, there's no question that you have to take it. It's a mitzvah to take. But for instance, to take pills on Shabbos, many people say you shouldn't be doing it. You're not allowed to do it. Why? Because in rabbinical times, the Gemara says you can't take medication on Shabbos. You can't do anything of refuah, of healing on Shabbos, because you might come to grind the medication, the herbs, which is growing from the ground, so it's biblical grinding, because you might come to make to grind medication on Shabbos. But
right before you use it?
No, because that's biblical grinding. It's mamish grinding. It's not cutting into smaller pieces. And if you're not doing it right before eating, you take the pills later on. You're not taking the...
But if you want to take it right
then it would be a question. But let me first finish the point. So therefore the Chum said you're not... But again, today there's more leniencies about it, because the fact is today people don't make their own medication. And they don't necessarily grind up herbs. There's synthetic medications that people do that might not even be the connection of grinding. So today, in today's world, they're a little bit more lenient about medications than they were, but nevertheless, the laws are like this. If somebody is on antibiotic, let's say it's a 10-day regimen, there's no question you could take it on Shabbos. Okay? Now, even if you started on Shabbos taking it, so you get it, halacha says like this: what happens if I have a medication to take on Shabbos that I have to take, but I could start Shabbos afternoon, or I could wait until after Shabbos is over. So then I'll only be taking it on one Shabbos instead of two. If I start today by day, it says no, you don't have to do, you can start right away, even though you're going to be taking it for 2 Shabbosim, because you're taking it on a regimen of, let's say, a 10-day, 5 days, whatever it is. When you start, even though it's across Shabbos, you have to do. And again, medications that people take, let's say for heart condition, blood pressure, there's no question that you have to take those medications on Shabbos. But what happens, somebody wants to take vitamins on Shabbos. I'm going to take a vitamin pill on Shabbos. So the thing is, it says in a lot of poskim that you really shouldn't. If it's a vitamin that the doctor says you must take 7 days a week, the doctor says you must, so then it's a different story. Okay? But let's say somebody takes just a multiple vitamin. So you don't have to take it. You could take it Friday and you could take it Saturday night too. You don't have to take it dafka on Shabbos. Even if a person, let's say, has to take an antibiotic 3 times a day. Okay? So if possible, to minimize taking it on Shabbos, if they can take it 3 times on Friday, especially in the longer Fridays. And then you take, let's say, 2 on Shabbos, and then the third one you take after Shabbos. Or if it's a short Shabbos, you take 2, 1 right after Shabbos and 1 later, whatever. But I'm saying, halachically, if somebody's taking antibiotics or they're taking, but stam to take vitamins, I'll give you another interesting argument between the Litvish poskim and the Hasidic poskim. The Litvish poskim, 1 by 1 hold, you're not allowed to take, years ago they had aspirins, right? So the Shuvas were all about aspirin. They hold you're not allowed to take aspirins on Shabbos, period. Unless if you're very sick, you have a high fever, 103, 102 or plus, but otherwise, you have a headache, you're not supposed to take aspirins on Shabbos. Which today would apply to Tylenol, Motrin, all those other stuff. And the Chassidish poskim hold that you could take aspirins on Shabbos, such medications on Shabbos. So we hold that, if you need to take Tylenol or whatever on Shabbos, you're allowed to take it. Minchas Elazar holds you could, Shulchan holds you could, but the Rabbeinu, all the Litvish Rabbeinu, and Steif, Rabbi Feinstein, they all hold you're not allowed to take aspirins on Shabbos. What?
Good questions. Breaking the pill, say the doctor says take a half a pill every so often.
Breaking a pill is not a problem unless if there's letters on the pill. A lot of pills have words on them. So then you're cutting a letter.
And what about pill cutter?
Pill cutter you can use on Shabbos, providing you're not cutting letters.
So it's not grinding.
No.
And capsules, some people don't want to take the capsule, they want to just open it up and pour the contents in some sort of a juice. Is that separating bad from the good?
No, because you're taking out what you want.
You're removing the capsule first and then you pour it.
I understand, but it's like peeling. How can you get to the medication? By the way, if the medication inside the capsule, because the capsule is gelatin, you mean? Okay, but I'll tell you a little secret. If the medicine inside the capsule is not kosher, it's better to take it in a capsule, swallow it, than put it into a liquid and eat it or drink it.